Welcome back to the Ace Talks podcast, where we talk about Ecuador and a little more. And today, we're going to talk a bit about education, which is a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time now. But the other day, I actually saw a comment on one of my YouTube videos, as well as I saw this post on Facebook, a little video, that kind of pushed me towards the direction of talking about education. But more so, I want to talk more about my experience with education here in Ecuador as both a student and a teacher. And then maybe I'll dive a little bit into what is education as a whole, or the way that I'm perceiving it, and some of the flaws, and why I believe that there are these flaws in education, at least nowadays. So, first, we'll start off by talking about my experience as a student here in Ecuador, because I think that is probably one of the best comparisons I have in terms of telling you what it was like before, at least before I was here, and what it was like when I got here, and a little bit of what I feel like it's like now, because more so now I feel I get a different kind of impression as a teacher of what education is. But of course it could just be because of my standing. But anyways, let's talk about my life as a student. So I got here to Ecuador basically in the last 2 years of my student life. I got into high school and I immediately got, thrown into what the system was like over here, because as I mentioned in my previous video on my YouTube channel, which is the Education Facts, although that video I went a lot into quirky things you might not know about the education here, there were some things that I mentioned that relate to how the education is different. For example, here, there is no, I guess you could say there is no real high school, like as determined high school, because there's only what you would call school, and over here they call it colegio, which is basically high school. But I don't see it so much just as high school, because in the higher version, the colegio part, there is also what you would say kind of like middle school mixed in with high school. And sometimes even in the whole institution, the whole school, they even have the elementary school. So sometimes it's hard to distinguish because there is no like high school and there is no specific like middle school and then there's an elementary school, but it's all just like one big school. And if you're not in the lower grades, like you're not in school, you're now in this next level, which is colegio. But when I arrived in the last 2 years, and I got pretty lucky. And I guess you could say lucky, but I guess in a way you could also say sneaky, not really, but because when I got here, I got to talk, well, I went to 2 separate high schools, and I almost got thrown into a high school that had classes until like 2 in the afternoon, and then they kept you there until like 4, and I did not want that. But I then checked a different high school where they only had classes until 12:45, which is basically the norm for a lot of high schools. Most high schools start from around 7, end at around 12:40 or 1 o'clock p.m. So staying until 2 or 4 felt pretty crazy to me. Even more so, considering in the States I don't remember having stayed that long. But anyways, point being, it just felt like a crazy schedule. And when I got in, and this is where the kind of sneaky part comes in, they were almost planning on sending me down a grade. Like I got here and they were considering putting me in what would be, I guess in the States, 10th grade, which I had already completed. So I was like, no. And they told me it depended on what, I guess you could say, path I chose, because the school that I decided to go to had 3 different, I guess, career paths, the school itself. One was science, the other was computer sciences, and the last was electronics. So if I had chosen computer science or if I had chosen electronics, they would have thrown me down a grade. But since I chose, I guess you could say science, which was kind of like chemistry, biology, what they kind of called it, I actually got to get into the grade that I was supposed to be in. And even then, I think I was actually supposed to be in my senior year, but I won't complain about losing 1 year when I could have actually ended up losing 2. Lesser of 2 evils, if you will. Very important phrase, by the way. But basically, that's the sneaky thing that I kind of got away with, I guess. But at the end of the day, it was just because I literally knew a bit about science, because that's something that, you see in the States. But on the other hand, when I was in the States, I had no way to justify that I had seen computer sciences, at least at the level that they detailed for me to get into the higher grade, and electronics, not at all. The most I did in the States was I had wood shop. I don't remember what the class was called exactly, but we worked with wood, But I had that class, but it had nothing to do with electronics. So science was the best path. So I went down the science path, and the good thing was our class was ironically the smallest class in all the school, so I got along with everyone really quickly. But I don't really want to go into much about what my interactions were. I just kind of want to detail what school life itself was, leaving aside my interaction with other fellow students, because I guess the summary of that would be that it was good. I can't really complain about the friends that I made at that time, and I guess some of them are still around to this day that I can actually call my good friends, especially my best friend. So the thing about the education here, first of all, was the very large barrier, which is language. Because as you would imagine, all the classes were in Spanish. Except for English class, of course. And math, I mean, it was in Spanish, but you understand numbers no matter what language you're in, what language you speak in. So it was very, very difficult. But the good thing is that I guess you could say the teachers were somewhat understanding. And I mean, I had to put in my own work in order to understand what I had to do. But I had a lot of help from fellow classmates, from the teachers, and it went well. I do kind of feel like my classmates helped me more at the beginning because, the new guy and from a different culture. But I think that's how it is for any person who comes to live from an exchange or from any perspective. They get that initial wave of hype that you're something new in a place that I guess you could say before didn't know very many new things. I still remember coming here and I had an iPod Touch, but the nice fancy one that, it was a Touch because the Nano was a different one. And no one had that. No one had that. But anyways, we're not gonna, I don't want to go into much of that. It's the educational part. So classes themselves, I felt, in a way, weren't, I guess they were hard because I didn't know the language, of course. But I felt like they weren't incredibly hard in the sense of what the content was related to. What was kind of frustrating was there was a lot of text written on the board that you had to write down in your notebook. And I'm not saying that's the worst method to teach. In fact, I don't think it's terrible. It just felt kind of weird that that was the situation for like the majority of classes. And it would always be like trying to write faster than they would erase. And my handwriting is terrible. And even then I couldn't like keep up with the speed that the teachers would write. I would have to borrow notebooks in order to catch up to what everyone was writing. So that was a kind of frustrating part of the education here. But aside from that, I did like the math classes being very competitive because at least with the teacher that we had, amazing teacher, and the math teacher, I will give him props for life, Mr. Parrales. He was my respect of a teacher. Like, wow, he was good. But he would keep us in line, and I mean, there wasn't a lot of us to keep in line, but it wasn't just our class. He would keep all students in line and make sure that everyone did their work. I'm not saying we were a rowdy bunch. Again, like I said, we were a very small class, but it's a lot better when the teacher has that kind of, I guess you could say, charisma to be able to control a class the way that he did. So the work in that class was always fun. It was always very competitive, seeing who could finish first and best, because it's not just finishing fast, but doing it well. But in other classes, once again, might just be the language barrier. It just didn't feel like it was the ideal education, And it's kind of funny to say that also, because I will, clarify that I wasn't the best student in the States. I had my specialties, obviously PE. I'm a very sporty guy. Math, I wasn't terrible, but because in the way the system works in the States, and that's something I do want to talk about, is very different from how it works over here. In the States, you kind of had to teach yourself, in the sense that you were given the assignments, and if you wanted to complete them at that moment, you could. If you didn't, then you can complete them whenever. But if you never completed them, you were going to be really lost in tests. And over here, I kind of ran into the reality that was the teacher just being there and making sure that you present it, because if you didn't present it at that moment, you're dead. Not literally dead, but you weren't going to pass because you weren't going to get your grade. So there was a little bit of a different level of how demanding the teacher was and how involved, I guess you could say, they were with the student. Whereas in the States, it kind of felt like there was a little bit more of a disconnect, where if you weren't doing things correctly, sure, they might call your parents, and I don't remember that ever happening to me in the States. I just know that I did get very bad grades at some point. I guess that was more around the time when I was very much involved with sports, but it was never like the involvement that there is over here, which I do have a bit of a problem with, but we'll talk about that when I talk about my life as a teacher. Right now, let's continue with my life as a student. So there was a lot of involvement from the teacher, and I just felt like in that sense, it was a bit better, at least in math, but it was a little bit worse in other subjects that I didn't understand, because I guess no matter how involved that they were, if I didn't understand what they were saying, it was not going to get through to me. That's why getting help from my parents or just looking stuff up myself helped me out more, which in that sense I felt was a better system in the States. But like I said, maybe, and I could just be talking about my school in the States and the little I remember of it, and maybe schools are different now, and maybe different schools were just different, but just to give you some insight of what my life as a student was. So I spent my last 2 years studying over here in high school, and the thing about the system is that it's very different from the States. Over here, you kind of see the same subjects like all the time. Like, it's just a different year. And I'm not saying that that's not a similar system in the States, but the States has the whole, at least the school that I was at, had the way that you can fix your schedule so that you can choose the electives that you like, and you can kind of organize your schedule to have a more advanced class if you felt that that was what you needed or that was what you wanted for more credits. If you didn't, you chose the easier classes. Over here, it's just one system. You just do everything. And of course, my school was kind of special in the sense that we had science, electronics, and computer sciences. But for the most part, most schools just have one linear path and it's done. Nowadays, I've noticed that there have been more schools. Like, for example, in Puerto Viejo, there was a school that opened up that offered more than one language. Like, every school forces English on you over here, which is fine. I make it sound like a bad thing, but it's a good thing because you should know English. And every school acknowledges it. This isn't just me, but Ecuador as a whole, schools, except for the people who really don't want to learn another language, like, everyone acknowledges that it is important to learn a language. More important than some other things that they force you to learn over here. But we'll talk about that in a separate video. And the fact being that there was a school that had like bilingual, like you could have some classes in English and somewhere in Spanish, was really cool. And I think they also offer French. So, there are options in that school because it's still open. And I guess I will talk about my teacher life where I had a less than optimal experience with a bilingual school later. We've mentioned this before in a podcast episode, but we'll talk about a little bit about it later on. So the fact being that in terms of at least the structure, it was, I guess you could say, accommodating, easy, because, you know, you just kind of go with the flow in the sense that if you're a student who was very used to the hectic, I'm choosing my different classes and different schedule, you came here and literally you just sit in your class, the teacher comes to you and, you know, you learn the subject that you have to learn, chemistry, math, anatomy, values, which was a class at one point, computer science in a certain degree, because since we didn't have that as our main class, like you did have like some classes that were involved with it, English, like it was so easy. It was very easy in that sense. But it's accommodating more than anything for a person like just, you know, relaxing, just kind of sitting down and just being like, okay, well, this is what I have to do. And not like having to look around. And especially if you consider the size of the school, because I won't speak for every school. There are some decently sized schools here, but most schools are like, I guess, very small. I don't even know what to compare it to because I would have to compare it to something that everyone knows that's not really all that big. But schools are, you know, small. Small enough to the point where you don't have to worry about getting lost for the most part. So at least those were the things that I could, I guess, highlight about being a student here. And I want to say that it was easier being a student here than it was in the States. Because like I said, there was a very hectic lifestyle. The only real complication I had, I guess you could say, was the language barrier. Because I didn't know Spanish well enough to be able to understand everything that was being written on a board, spoken, explained, have a conversation, and not just with the students, because with fellow classmates, but with the teacher, because like how do you reply to someone who's speaking at what seems like the speed of light? So it was a very difficult situation in that aspect. But other than that, it was just a very, you know, easy experience, which is why I find it weird, and maybe we'll go into that later, but I find it weird that there are people who say that the education here is better than the education in places like the States. And that might be true for certain schools. That might be true. But I don't want to generalize it as a 100% it's better or 100% it's worse. We will have to talk about that, I think, a little bit later on. And I do have it as a talking point, so we'll talk about that later. But in my personal opinion, I felt that the school here would have been easier if I would have known Spanish than schools in the States while knowing English. My opinion, of course. I did have some honor classes, some higher level classes in the States, which might have made it a little bit more complicated, but for the most part, like I said, I felt like it was much easier over here. So that is, I guess, the education part. I don't want to go into too much detail of what each class was like because that would make this a nightmarishly long podcast episode. Just understand that there was nothing that I felt that I couldn't have understood if I wouldn't have dedicated the time to understand it and if I would have known the language to understand it. Now, let's go into some of the quirky things that I found weird over here that I mentioned in my random facts video. This whole situation with the events at every moment, which is something that we're going to mention because it has to do with the comment. Random things that go around the school. I understand. I guess you could say open houses. That's normal. But there were just a variety of random events that just felt like that's taken more into consideration than the education itself. Like I said, we'll go into that later. There was that. Obviously, the swearing of allegiance. Every Monday morning, like in the States, if I remember correctly, you go into class and you pledge of allegiance, but over here, it's just on Mondays. I don't want to be quoted on that just yet because I don't remember. I could have sworn that every day we would say the Pledge of Allegiance in the States. Over here, it's only on Mondays. Maybe someone can correct me on that later on. That was a very weird thing too, because the way that you do it over here is that everyone gets together in the, I guess, the PE court. They get together outside in lines, and you have to like organize the students because rambunctious, you know, we were kids. So it's like get everyone in order, and everyone has to say the Salve Patria, mil veces, o Patria, which is the anthem. I said it so many times that I've memorized it for the most part. I can do it more with the music in the background, but I've memorized it at this point. And you say that anthem, there's the national anthem, and then there's the school anthem, and then afterwards they send you to your classes. So that was something that was probably a big difference that I should have mentioned in that video, probably for a future video that I make about education and random things you might not know about. But, you know, there's the whole, like I said, also pledging of allegiance to the flag, which happens when you're in basically your senior year. There was no prom, from what I remember, but there was that Pledge of Allegiance, which, you know, one doesn't have anything to do with the other, because a prom is a dance, and this is just you grabbing a flag, kissing it, and saying, I swear. What they have implemented these last few years is that students at their final year, they order this varsity jacket, which I never got one in the States because, like I said, I got here before I got to enter varsity. But I think it's pretty cool. It's a nice looking jacket, which I wish I would have had in the States. Also, the ring that they got, I don't remember if here you could also get a ring. I think you could, but it was expensive and didn't have money for a ring like that. In fact, this ring, I don't even think it's it's silver. It's just a ring that I had laying around and that I use all the time. So, you know, there's that. But, you know, you could just call those novelty things, because what am I going to do with a varsity jacket right now? What am I going to do with the ring? Except for say that this is where I graduated from and, you know, it's a nice ring. But yeah, that's pretty much the experience here as a student. Nothing too crazy, but very different from the States. Oh, something that I didn't mention, but there are no big sporting events like there are in the States. I remember being a football player over there. You know, you had the football games. Being a track athlete, you had the track meets, but that doesn't exist here at a high school level. It only exists if you happen to be a part of the federation, which I did mention in the video as well. But yeah, other than that, really, it's just if you enjoy sports to that level, you can do it, but there's no official sports teams here in the schools. So anyways, that's my life as a student. And like I said, it wasn't a bad life. I guess let me talk a little bit about my life as a college student as well, because it does relate in a way, in the sense that as a college student, it felt kind of like, once again, kind of like a very simplified version of college in the States or university in the States. And it's hard for me to really say that because I didn't study university in the United States. But from everything I hear, university studies in the States are not easy. And over here, it felt like high school plus. like literally, it's not like the giant classrooms with the seats that span the whole area. I don't even know if I could call it a classroom. It's more like a room that's just huge and has all the seats, and it has one place where the stage where the teacher just talks. It's not like that over here. It's like literally going into a high school. You go into your classroom and you have a teacher talk to you and explain things to you. It felt like high school. Except for college over here felt like high school in the States, because you chose your classes, of course. Like, you choose the credits that you want. So you chose which class you want, the credits, and that's what you would take for the year. You could, you know, overtake credits, but I couldn't do that because I was also at one point working. So, you know, I kind of I started my teacher career early while I was studying, which is why I also wanted to link it in with college education. But it was just that. It was literally like high school plus, or United States high school is Ecuadorian college. That's what it felt like for me. It might be different for everyone else, like I've said before, but that's what it was like for me. And in some cases, even easier or worse, because there were teachers, I'm not going to name them because even if, they were like that, maybe they had their reasons. I did hear at one point that some of the teachers weren't getting paid. So I could understand it when teachers came in and just didn't teach. Literally, I had teachers that would sit and just give us the free hour. Like, okay. No one was complaining. Some people took it upon themselves to, study other subjects, study the subject of the class we were in, do other things, But it was just, it was just so weird because you picture college as this like next level, super difficult education, and really I swear when I was in college, all I could think was this is like high school in the States, or this is just high school plus. Like, it's high school, but just a little bit harder. Like, now the teachers don't necessarily come to your classroom. You actually go to their classroom because university is a little bit bigger than high schools. Well, not a little bit. It's a lot bigger than high schools. You actually have to walk around the whole campus. But it's not universities. It's not like the high schools, the universities in the States, or even the high schools in the States. Well, maybe it's bigger than the high schools in the States, but definitely not anywhere near universities in the States. So it's crazy, how much I wanted to compare the university here to the high school in the States. But yeah, that was, I guess, a very summarized university life because there's not much more I can say except for the fact, I guess, one situation that happened to a friend who, because the teacher, I guess, didn't want to help them, she was pregnant and she got held back a year in college because the teacher didn't want to help her, and she was pregnant, like coming in with a big belly every day. I felt so bad for her, but there was nothing we could do. That was the teacher's choice. And the fact that at the end of the career, you could choose between a comprehensive test that was pretty much a test of everything you saw during your life in college, or you can do the thesis, which basically, a presentation about something that you investigated, and you get to work with someone on that. And I worked with who was at the time my girlfriend, who, even though we don't really talk right now because we're not together anymore, I would like to take the time to say thank you for your help and for being the amazing person you were with me in the college that we were at, and for helping me with so many things while we were there. I was never and have never been a perfect student, and I acknowledge that. I don't think I'm a perfect person at all. I have my flaws, but thank you for accepting me for who I was and for helping me during that time. Because even at that time, my Spanish was much better by the time I was in college, of course. It got much better as college passed. In fact, I think my second year of college was when I felt like I had mastered Spanish. Before that, I knew Spanish because the 2 years of high school were not in vain. But when I was 2 years into college, and I guess you could say 4 years into being in Ecuador, was when I felt supreme confidence in my Spanish speaking. And I know I went a little bit off topic here, a little bit of a tangent, but it's all a part of what was part of that life going into, leaving college. Because once I left college, obviously I went on to teach, and I was already teaching in college, which was kind of funny. I don't know if it works like that in the States. I understand in the States there are college students who work, but they work part-time jobs in shifts where, they can actually do that. But here, part-time isn't like a common thing. Since there's no abundance of part-time jobs, you're kind of forced into studying in a schedule and working in another. What that looked like for me was, in the morning, I had the full-time teaching job, and in the afternoon, I had my studies, my university studies, which, once I got a motorcycle in my university life, that made everything so much easier. But before that, it was like having to, either walk or taxi everything. And if I remember correctly, I actually got the job after I got my first motorcycle. So I had saved up some money, and that's what I used to buy a used motorcycle. And then I went to college, not to college, I went to work. And that's when I had an easy time getting to work. Because if not, it would have been nightmarish to think of how much I would have spent in taxis going from my house to work, from work to the university, and then either choosing to walk at night because my classes in the university ended at 9, to walk at night from the university to my house, which was approximately a 15 to 20 minute walk, depending on how fast I walked. Or, taking a taxi would have just made everything more expensive. You could opt for a bus. I've talked about this before, though. I'm not really a bus person. So, anyways, that's ending the whole student life. Going into my life as a teacher, this is where I experienced realities that I guess you do experience as a student, because obviously before you're a teacher, you're a student and you see everything. But being in the role of a teacher, you see other things that you don't notice as a student. For example, the first school I worked at, I got in there once again because of the help of who is now my ex. And the school itself, which is kind of funny because it's a bilingual school, and you would think that they would want a native speaker. And this is kind of a problem a lot of people here in Ecuador have with fighting against having experience and fighting against the system, because I'm guessing this is the same thing everywhere, I'm guessing. But if you don't have experience, people don't want to hire you. So getting into a school, like even the least prestigious ones, like people don't want to hire you because you don't have experience. I did have experience, ironically, before I went into the school, because like I said, I bought my motorcycle, but I bought it through substituting in high schools, through doing a lot of substitution work, helping people with assignments. So I got money, and that's what I used to buy my motorcycle. But most people, they don't have experience, and some of them aren't even native speakers. So I'm like, how do you even get a job here if no one wants to hire you without experience, and they won't even hire you if you actually know what you're doing? So it was a weird thing. But I got into this school with my girlfriend at the time. She helped me get in because that's where she was working at. And if you remember what I talked about in the Dark Side of Ecuador podcast episode, which I think was episode 3, I mentioned that was a school that everyone, not just me, not just the whiny gringo, the whiny American, but everyone at that school had to sue that school for us to get paid, because we weren't getting paid like months of our salary. And like after 5 months, you would get 1 month of salary. Like, what are you talking about? Like, in my position as a student and as someone who was living with my parents, I didn't I wasn't dying for the money. Like, I wanted it, of course, because I want to buy my things. But like, I wasn't like, oh, this is going to kill me if I don't have it. But for someone who has a family, because there were people who were parents who were working at that school, like, dude, how do you feed your families if you're not getting paid? So I thought that was horrible. Like, that wasn't fair. But not every place is like this. Although, ironically, the place that I ended up working after that, like, not the academy, because the academy that I work at now is actually a great place. We get paid on time. We get paid a fair amount based on the years that we've been working there or the experience that we have. And it's just much better overall. I just wish I had more hours so I could earn more. But in the school that I worked at afterwards, the high school, this is where I learned what it was like to be a high school teacher. The pay was low, and it was typically late. Like, once again, going into a month late on payments. Not the 5 months from the other school, but a month late. So I can understand, like I said earlier, with the university teachers, when they were, they didn't want to work maybe because they weren't getting paid. As a high school teacher, I did my best, even when I was getting paid late. In the school that I was working at, I did what I considered was my best at the time. Because like I said, I was working while I was in college, so I was still kind of getting the hang of being a teacher. But when I was in high school, it was just different. When I started working in high school, because at that point, I had the experience from the academy, and little by little, I gained more experience by teaching students, especially since the first year I had working at the high school. I had the rowdiest groups, all of the highest, not level in sense that they knew the most, but they were the varsity students. And man, they were they were troublemakers for the most part. There was I think one class that was really nice, in comparison to the rest, of course, because they did have their own troublemakers. But every other class was just 40 students, 45 students. Each one was a different level of trouble. Some of them were athletes, and this is something that you have to get used to with some schools over here, that if the student is an athlete, you're more than likely to never see them, or they're more than likely to not do anything in your class. They're going to be the worst student. There are exceptions. There are exceptions, as with all things in life. But even those exceptions run into some kind of issue. For example, I'll just give you that one exception that I had because I feel like it was just one exception out of so many. I had one student. She was a soccer player. And this was not the first year, of course. The first year, I had all the varsity students, and they were just all, man, they were troublemakers. But there was one class, like I said, really good. And there was another class that they gave me a plaque because they really liked me as a teacher, because I tried to be dynamic, I tried to be fun, I tried to do different things to teach that were kind of similar to what I did at the academy I worked at. And some students loved it. Like, they worked with it. We had amazing time together. But we're talking about a classroom of 40 students. I had like 10 or 15 that participated correctly in all the activities. Some just kind of participated for fun. And then you had the students who really did not care at all. And no matter how dynamic a teacher you are, there was just nothing you could do to reach those students. So, you do have that over here as well. So there was one year I had a student. She was a soccer player, and she did her assignments. She was a very good student in the sense that she participated, she did her assignments. There were days that she wasn't there, but you understand that when the student is good. And unfortunately, as a teacher, sometimes, I don't know if all teachers do this, but as in a personal sense, as a teacher, when you see that there's a student who has so many difficulties in the sense that they have a busy life outside of school being an athlete, they still come to school and do their best, you can't forgive the students who don't do that. And once again, we go into this conversation of not everyone's the same. So maybe some of these students had difficult lives at home. Maybe some of these students had very demanding trainers who just pumped out every last bit of energy of them so that when they went to school, they just were dead. But it just felt like if some students can do it, then I think that all students can put in a little bit more of the effort. I never reprimanded them for that. I more reprimanded them just for not turning in their assignments, because I tried to be fair, and as long as students did their assignments, I'd be able to help them. But there were students who didn't even do that. But this girl, she would do everything. And what made it sad, and this is where the complications come in, is that the next year, she wasn't studying anymore. I think she dedicated her life to sports, because I've seen some pictures in social media where she's like traveling to different countries and doing sports at I guess a more professional level. But I guess that's just kind of the path that you take as a student over here, because, there's no, I want to say there's no path to guaranteed success. But if you have good parents, good standing, and, what they call here palanca, which is, someone that who can get you a good job, if you don't have that, you don't have guarantees. So if you have this path to be an athlete, to do something that you love and succeed at it and get money from it, then I'm pretty sure a lot of students will opt for that path and abandon studies completely. Because the alternative path, studying, everyone talks about it here. Either you study and you get a bad job that pays you poorly, or you don't study and you get a bad job that pays you poorly. So, which one do you choose? Anyways, But as a teacher, you notice a lot of things, and it's just, there's this kind of baked in corruption, if you want to call it that. I don't know if it was just, you know, coincidence, the school that I was at, but I would literally fail students. Like, not because I hate them. I don't hate anyone because I have no enemies. And I just want everyone to learn, and I gave my best quality education to students who I think didn't even care that I existed. But I had to fail them. Like, literally, I had to give them bad grades. And you can't give them a 0, by the way, here. The lowest grade you can give them is like a 1, I think. And I had students who had like 2s or 3s because I tried to help them, you know. If they at least made the effort to try to answer stuff, you know, I would give them grades. But these students would somehow still pass to the next year. Like, I understand there's a part of the system that doesn't let students fail without them taking a variety of tests, which some students go through and still fail anyways. But for them to pass, some of them don't attend classes. Some of them, like I said, horrible grades. Some of them don't care. Like, what is that teaching that student for the future? Like, are they actually going to be prepared as adults to face the university, to face the real life? I didn't think so. So at one point, when I got tired of it all, like tired of students not doing their best, tired of the system that lets students who don't do their best pass, while students who do their best have to see these students pass, because that's the frustrating thing about it. Like, you can step on me and like, fine, okay, I'm just a teacher. But like to kick aside the efforts by other students who are always there, turn in all their assignments, get the best grades, like, it's so much that it just felt so bad. Like, seeing how their efforts amounted to almost, I mean, I guess you could say they amounted to a lot because they're more prepared, but it's like the other students were spitting in their faces, spitting in the faces of their efforts. And like I said, I know that's not the case because they're more prepared for everything later on, but it still felt bad. Add to that low payment and just the system that felt like it was never going to change, I just couldn't keep teaching at high schools, which is why I don't teach at high schools right now. I will teach high school students. I will substitute from time to time in certain situations. If someone pays me for private classes, I will give the classes. But I don't want to deal with high school because it's just fighting against a wall at this point, because no matter how much I push it, it just stays the same. Like, I try to give the best quality education to students that don't care. At least, let's just say out of 100%, 80% don't care. And a system that allows these students to keep not caring without consequence, which isn't fair for the students that do care and, you know, just have to like see this. I'm always worried that the students who see these bad students are eventually going to turn into bad students because they're like, if they can do it, I can do it too. I hope that never happens, because once that happens, education is doomed. And this is where I think we should transition into what I see in education and the flaws in this system. And you just heard some of the biggest flaws. Clearly, there's some level of corruption in the system, because a student doesn't just pass because I don't know, they just, miraculously passed. They go into the office with whoever is the principal of any school. By the way, this is not just my school that I worked at. In fact, I respect the school that I worked at a lot. But, you know, I do think it's not right to let these students pass when they clearly should have failed. I don't know what commitment they go through. I don't know if there's monetary values added to, you know, allowing them pass, but it just doesn't seem fair. So there's corruption baked into the educational system. Even if you're like, there are some students who have teachers who are their like godparents or family So there's that level where they could, you could assume that they're passing because they have that connection. It's not always the case, of course, but you can assume it, especially with how things are over here. Students in college will blatantly tell their teachers, hey, we'll give you a bottle of whiskey at the end of the year so that you can pass. Do the teachers accept? I can't confirm. I'm not a university teacher, and no teacher will openly tell you, oh yeah, I accepted a bottle of whiskey to pass. But I remember there were students, classmates of mine, who would say, we should just invite the teacher to eat or to give him a bottle of whiskey and he'll pass us. So, there are things. There are things and there are things. And it's just, there's too much like family, corruption, preference. These things are limiting the potential that people have to improve as students. And I don't think some of this is just limited to here. I think a lot of things for students who are at a higher level are just being kind of like spoon-fed to them. And I thought it was just here. But the other day I saw a video, and this goes into the comments also. Like we'll talk about the video in the comment right now that I saw on the video on Facebook and the comments on YouTube. The video shows that there's like these teachers talking about how their students, they can't read. And they're at a level where, they're at a grade where they should be able to read. Reading comprehension, they don't understand it. And to me, this is such an important thing because I teach English with reading comprehension attached to it, because I think it is one of the most important tools when learning a language. And just in general, for a healthy brain, it's very important for students to know how to read. And like over here, I've always felt like there are students who are at a high school level. You explain everything with examples, and the student still doesn't get it. And it's not like I explain it in English. Like sometimes I will, and then I'll explain it in Spanish, but it's not like I only explain it in English, and the students are just like, I don't understand English. Like I explain it in English, I explain it in Spanish, and the students still don't understand. For the 80% that don't care, I get that they don't understand because they don't care. They don't even pay attention. But for the other percentage, it just feels like there's a gap in education where at some point everyone agreed that you have to you almost have to go to the student, grab their pencil and write down the things for them, for them to understand. Because if not, they're not going to understand. It's almost like you have to have an individualistic education for each student. Like you teach, just throwing out names, you teach John individually. You teach Stephen individually. You teach Brian individually. You go there and you show them what they have to do for them to understand. This is acceptable for me at a low level, like kindergarten, elementary school kids. But in high school, it just feels like, and maybe it's just me overestimating high school students, but it just feels like once you've explained it and you've given a very decent explanation on the board and you've explained it in both languages, students who are still asking for explanations after that are not paying attention, don't care. Once again, 80%, or there's gaps in their knowledge that they should have had where they can process what you just explained and be able to produce it by themselves. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a very demanding teacher. Like I said, I could just be wrong on this point. I don't, this might be a hot take also, but it's just, it feels very much like there's a big gap in education. And I'm not sure, because what these teachers said, if this gap is produced by technology, because in my mind, I think it is. That's one of the reasons. Because nowadays, kids, little kids, are given tablets and just playing around, and you would assume that a tablet might be very useful because, they can look up information, but what logical kid, what real kid is out there with a tablet looking up books and information. Like, if we talk about 100% of kids, I guarantee you that number is less than 20% of kids who are actually like actively reading good things. The most that I could imagine is some of them watching educational videos, because that's what the current meta, like the current system is like. Looking for things that like are videos that will teach you the things that you need to know. So I could see kids doing that, watching a video and learning from that. But I definitely don't see kids, like I don't see kids needing tablets at the ages that they're at. Those kids need to be reading a physical book or practicing hanging out with mom and dad, playing with them so that way they can establish the family connection, which is part of my argument here. But I also want to talk about the comments I saw on YouTube. In a very summarized sense, what the comment said was that here in Ecuador, because this is a very Ecuador thing, there's a lot of events that seem to take priority over the education. And that's something that I noticed more being a teacher, and even now outside of being a high school teacher, but like there seems to be an event for everything. Like I said, there's the Olympics that have an event, and that event is not just like, oh, you go to the Olympics and you're done. You get uniforms made. Students have to like choose their teams, and there's a lot of preparation in that. There's the parade that students literally get out of class, and sometimes even after school, they practice the marching band, the girls who do the whole dances and choreographies, the preparation of a float if they have to do it, if they decide to, which most schools do. And that messes with both the students and the teacher's schedule, because as a teacher, I've had students who, no, teacher, I gotta go because I gotta do something. I'm like, you can't leave. You got class. And they're like, no, I have permission. Like, go. And how do you make that student catch up to the rest of the students while they're advancing? And it's just such a complication for teachers, and such a possible waste of time, hot take number 2, for students. Not 100% waste of time, because there is this whole companionship, friendship that gets established in these events, in sporting events especially, the Olympics, the choreographies that people prepare for the inauguration for these events or for the parades, establishing bonds. There's good things that come from this, and there's good cultural things that come from some of these events too, that kind of tie into, living with people and maybe making it different from other places where you're just kind of like, I guess you could argue in the States, everything is just so stone cold. There's no events that let you come together with everyone. So you're just used to like not caring about anyone because you're just in it for you. I don't know if that's actually the case, but that's what everyone paints it to me as, where everyone in the States have become robots. No one gets along with anyone anymore. And I don't remember the States being like that, which is why it's always been very weird to me when people talk to me about that. But, I can't talk about it because I haven't been there in a very long time. But everyone that comes here, the people I've met that have come from the States, not everyone, but 90% plus, they've been just such nice people. Like, it's amazing to believe that they're the same people that come from the place that they're talking about are filled with people who are on their cell phones all the time and don't care about anyone. So maybe I just get to meet the exceptions. Who knows? But it's just a very, very, very bad direction that I feel that schools here take, giving a priority to these events. It's not terrible. It has its plus sides. But the bad part is you're kind of just promoting the school. Like, you're showing the good things so that way you get more attention to your school, but not because you're a good school, but because you have good events. And I think that's what the comment that mentioned all of these events was trying to emphasize, because it feels like you're showboating. You're just kind of like showing off and giving an image of something that's not the reality. Like, I guess it's promotion, it's marketing. And I talked about this in my last podcast episode, if I remember correctly, where I actually mentioned that some of the things people do is marketing. It's literally marketing. No one's gonna tell you that there's like this zone that's dangerous. Like maybe they will if they're nice people, but for example, I could sell you a house and tell you it's the best house ever. But I don't tell you that someone got robbed here or someone gets robbed here every week. And that sets an unrealistic, I guess, I'm not sure if it's an expectation or reality, because you think that if I don't tell you about that, you just think, oh, this is a nice house. Like, oh, it has everything you need. But you don't know that something bad is happening there every week outside. Like, and that's something important that you should know. So it's marketing. You'll market the pretty part and hide the bad parts. It happens everywhere. I know it happens everywhere because I've seen the marketing for Airbnbs in the States as well. And I'm sure that not everything is as it's shown in the picture. You go there and you notice, oh, maybe there's these details that you didn't see. But that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of these events that just serve to market the school, but not the education of the school. Just, this school has these really nice events. We have the best choreographies. We have the best floats, the best band. Our Olympics have the best inauguration in all of the city. Like, but what does that tell me about how smart your kid is or how good your teachers are? Like, that doesn't tell me anything. I do like it when some schools promote that they have like the best student in all the country, because that is a very good thing to be proud of. But I mean, and I'm not saying that it's not good to be good at choreographies or have these nice events, but you can't put that over a child's education, not in a school. It's just weird, you know. It's not ideal, and it's just something that as a person living here, not even just as a teacher or a student, you just notice throughout the whole time that you're here. And once again, I won't say everyone is like that. I'm pretty sure there's some place here that has better standards for, you know, marketing and the way that they show off their students. But it's just the way that I see it, it's always an emphasis on looking good and not actually being good. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. I'm pretty sure you can ask a lot of people, mainly foreigners, because I'm pretty sure students here won't even notice until they're, you know, very far past into their adult years. And even then they might not notice because you just enjoy the event so much that you don't see the negatives to them. Especially not as a student. To you, that's just free hours. But as an adult, as a teacher, as a parent, and I wish parents would notice that, because that's another problem that I have. Another problem that I have. And I guess we should talk about that now. And I'm going to use this phrase. And if it applies to you, it's probably going to hurt. If it doesn't, just listen to it and don't worry about it. You don't have to spoil your children for them to know that you love them. And there's this really big problem right now being a teacher that maybe I should have mentioned in the teacher section, but there's this really big problem with being a teacher nowadays where students are just like, they're more important than teachers. I don't know if that's hot take number 3, but here we go. Basically, like, if a student does a bad job, it's the teacher's fault. And sometimes that is the case. I will accept that is the case sometimes, because there are terrible teachers out there. Just like there are good teachers, there are absolutely booty teachers in the world. No one can deny that, because in every job you have your weakest link. But you can't tell me that in a class of, let's just say 40 students, which isn't even a good example because 40 students is not a good class size. Let's say in a class of 30 students, which is more fair. You have 1 student or 5 students that do terribly, absolutely zeros all the time. But you have 35 students that do great. You can say, oh, the teacher didn't do her job because these 5 students didn't learn. No, there's 35 students who clearly are doing good. So you can't say that the teacher did a bad job because there are 35 students who are learning. These 5 students just don't care. Or it's not for them. And that's a problem that I have with the educational system as a whole, that, maybe hot take 4, that it's geared towards making sure that people are graded based on how good they are in subjects. You get grades in math, science, language arts, PE, and that defines you as a good student if you get all good grades. But if you get a bad grade on math, science, PE, but you get an excellent grade in language arts, they don't acknowledge that maybe your skill is more to be something related to language arts. They just think you're a bad student overall because you don't know about these other things, when that's not really the case. You're not dumb if you don't know a specific subject, like to the fullest. It's just maybe not for you. And the system, I don't think that's gonna change anytime soon, because that's just been around since forever apparently, where you get graded based on how good you are in all of these subjects and not acknowledging, like maybe you will get acknowledged that you're good at something if you stand out superbly, like athletes is the best example. If you're a great football player, you get scouted and people want you on their teams for college. But it's like everything else, like it's very difficult unless there's something that shows that you're really good at this. So the system is messed up and parents aren't helping, because parents defend the poor behaviors of students, blaming the teacher, when what fault does the teacher have if a student just doesn't want to learn? Or if you as a parent have the students, send your children with a phone to school, or you at home, you don't pay attention to your child. That's why I wanted to talk about family being so important when it comes to the education of a child. Because the job of a teacher, it pretty much ends as soon as school ends. The bell rings and the student is gone. And of course you do, as a teacher, we have to grade homework and we have to do things at home, which are very tedious tasks sometimes. But we don't have to deal with a parent, like, we shouldn't have to deal with a parent having to tell us, my child's not performing, what did you do? Like, I don't know, at home, are you giving your child, are you making sure that your child is spending an hour to study and not an hour to play Fortnite or GTA or some other game? Because that's what typically happens. And I saw it in the pandemic. And that was the most frustrating time when I saw it. When there were parents who saw their children with their phones. They were there with their children, watching their children like study because they were in virtual online classes. And they would blame the teacher because the student was on their phone. Like, what do you want me to do? Reach through your screen and take their phone? I can call them out for it. And we do call them out for it. But even if we call them out for it, if the student is still down here with the phone, like playing around, what can we do about that? And in real life, having your hands under a table with a phone is the real life equivalent to that is a parent letting their child go to school with a tablet, with a laptop that they don't need. Because there are some schools that permit it, of course, and need it. But if they don't need it, what are you doing sending them with those things? Or at least configure it so that these devices only can do the things that they're meant to do for a school setting. Then you know they're using it for the right things. But parents aren't putting in the work. Families are very disconnected from their children. Some don't even spend time with them. And I find it so strange how you can not spend time with the most important thing in your life. I don't know if all parents are like that, but I think all parents consider their child to be the most important thing to them. And they don't have time for that. Parents don't even have time for themselves sometimes. And I get that because you're busy. I respect that. But you gotta make time, find a way. It doesn't have to be all day, every day, but find a way. Because if you're not there for your child, it doesn't matter how good of a teacher I am, I can't replace you. I can't replace parents. You have to be there for them. If not, they're not gonna learn. So that's the whole situation about education. Not just here. These are my views on education. This is my experience as a teacher, my experience as a student, my experience in general as someone who has experienced education on both sides and just I just don't know what to do anymore. As a teacher, I just do my best to give the most interesting, entertaining classes and make sure that everyone understands that it's not up to the teacher all the time. If you as a student, if you don't do anything, you're not going to get better. It's like practicing for a sport. If you don't go home and like do exercise to get better, you're not going to get chosen for the team. So, you know, I could make a lot of comparisons, but just understand education has a long way to go from being perfect, but nothing in life is perfect, unfortunately. Although I guess you could say there's fun in trying to make things better, but, you know, I just wish things were better now. So yeah, that is my point of view on education in Ecuador, education in general, because I also talked about some aspects about education in the States. This whole reading comprehension thing is not just over here, it's over there. And the way to fix it is for parents to get on their kids and tell them to do the things they have to do. Like, stop letting them just play games. Stop letting them just be on tablets. Like, be there for them. Be a parent, not just an observer. Don't let the internet teach your children. You have things that you have to teach them. And while I can understand that there are people who maybe are parents now who had a terrible parents in the past, so they want to be better, leaving your child to do whatever they want or spoiling the life out of them, blaming the teacher for the things that they're doing, this is not the way. I hope this helped clarify some things for some people about the education here, about what I think is wrong with education as a whole, and hopefully you can take good things away from this and apply them in your life. And I know this was a long episode, but it was a long episode coming. And we might have a part 2 where we talk to ex-students about what their life as students have been here in Ecuador, maybe even current teachers, so that they can give their points of view as well. But for now, this is what I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Ace Talks podcast. We will have future episodes coming soon, so stay tuned for that. And, you know, make sure you take care. Give your children the best education possible by being there for them, not just sending them to the best schools. And as always, Ace out.